Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this presentation hosted by the HAA, Humber Architectural Association. I'd like to start by welcoming our own members in the Humber branch, members of other branches across RIBA Yorkshire region, and also from further afield. Had quite a few people sign up for this, so I assume it's reached quite a big audience. A few housekeeping things before I hand over to the guys from ID. This is being recorded, so it'll be hosted on the RBA YouTube channel, so you can catch up there and watch again. There's also a Q&A that's live throughout the event, so the guys at ID will be answering any questions at the end, but feel free to post questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll be able to ask some of those at the end. So it gives me pleasure to welcome Andy Inch and Rob Cook from ID Architecture in Grimsby. They are, well, Rob himself is a committee member on the HAA, so we're in constant contact with themselves. A bit of background about the practice: they're founded in 2010, and they have a stellar reputation for delivering design excellence and creativity in a lot of sectors they work in. Primarily on their website, you'll see that it's very high quality contemporary residences as well as large complex commercial buildings, both of which, I mean, all their projects you'll see from their website, there's some really classy projects, really detailed, highly finished, and making some brilliant photos to put on their websites. They've got a number of highly acclaimed, shortlisted and award-winning schemes on there, one of which is obviously this evening's feature spotlight project, Barrow House, in Lincolnshire. So this is a project that's been featured in all the journals. You probably pick one up last year and you'll have seen it somewhere. Shortlisted for the RIBA Yorkshire Awards last year, which unfortunately got postponed, but we'll hopefully pick up again this year. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Andy and Rob to talk us through the project.
Thank you, Ross. Good evening. I'm Andy, one of the directors, and this is Rob, one of our principal architects at ID Architecture. This presentation explains the design and development of Barrow House. I'm going to run through the challenges of planning, constraints of the site and the design process. Then Rob's going to briefly go over the construction process and run through a virtual tour of the completed building. So if you can see the slides on screen, basically Barrow House is a single family residence in the Lincolnshire countryside. It was completed in 2019. The site was a disused area of ex-arable farmland and was already in the ownership of the client's family when they first approached us in 2016. Their ambition was to build a new home on the site to be close to their work and family ties. Because the site is in the Lincolnshire Wolds area of outstanding natural beauty, away from the nearest settlement, and because planning policy has a strong tendency to direct development towards settlements rather than the countryside, we knew this would have to be a country house clause exception dwelling. At that time, this was framed under paragraph 55 of the National Planning Policy Framework. This has now changed to paragraph 79, and the policy wording is essentially the same. This is a policy that many will have heard of, as it's synonymous with modern one-off houses. So I'll start by briefly explaining what it entails. Paragraph 79 is made up of 5 clauses, A to E. Of these clauses, definitely the most interesting in architectural terms is E. This is the one relevant to Barrow House and is intended to ensure exceptional design. It's short, it's in 2 parts with 4 main requirements, but it's far from simple to achieve. The first part requires the design to be truly outstanding or innovative, reflecting the highest standards in architecture. Being deemed to be outstanding is obviously subjective and can need a high degree of evidence to support. This is really a judgment based on how well a design responds to the challenges of the site, and often depends on an assessment by an independent design panel. Assuming the design can be considered outstanding, then it will probably follow that by default it will also help to raise standards of design more generally in rural areas, which is the other part of the first clause. Innovation is also a requirement, and this can be the most difficult aspect to achieve. It has to be something that responds to the needs of the proposal and can be genuinely justified, rather than something tagged on for its own sake. This takes research and sometimes an element of luck to come across something new and interesting that also happens to be relevant to the project. The second bulleted part entails significant enhancement of the immediate setting. This can also be a big task depending on the starting condition of the site. If, for example, the site is a rolling greenfield meadow, then it's always going to be a challenge to justify that it will be enhanced by putting a house on it. For this aspect, it's important to identify the most improvable aspects of the site where landscape, biodiversity, heritage impacts or other conditions can be enhanced. The last part, being sensitive to the defining characteristics of the local area, requires an understanding of the qualities and features of the locality. Local characteristics can be generated by many factors, from landscape, structures, topography, or even a local civil engineering project. This takes research and time exploring the site and the area to make sure the development will fit comfortably in its place, either in sympathy or sometimes by being disguised in its setting. The site of Barrow House is almost a hectare in area, so it was a good size to incorporate landscape and biodiversity enhancements alongside the development. The client's family had already carried out improvements to the land with introduction of a large pond and tree planting, so this slightly reduced the opportunities to make improvements compared to if it had been retained as an arable field. Nonetheless, to the east side of the site there was a large concrete hard standing that had been used for storing machinery and farm waste. This part of the land was in obvious need of enhancement, so was the most appropriate area for development. It also had the benefit of the best outlook over the valley and to the Barrow. To the west of the site is the Hatcliff Barrow, scheduled ancient monument. This is a well-preserved prehistoric burial mound that is the obvious inspiration behind the name of Barrow House. We spent time investigating the Barrow and viewing it from the site and vice versa. This photo of it on screen shows it is about 3 meters high and it's very prominent in the landscape. It happens to be faced directly by nearby Hatcliff Manor, from which it is thought the Barrow may have been a deliberate focus, acting as a backdrop to its gardens. We felt this had a strong narrative, granting appropriate prominence to the Barrow, and we were keen to incorporate this into our proposal. Barrow House was our first paragraph 79 application, and we were fortunate it's in the region of a local authority we already knew very well at North East Links. We were able to work closely with a case officer who had a great local knowledge and supported our ambitions for the project. We had numerous meetings and his insights were beneficial, allowing us to develop the concept, confident we were addressing the key planning concerns. We walked the local area numerous times to investigate the site's relationship to its surroundings and to assess it in relation to public aspects. We found views were mostly screened by trees and hedgerows, but there are 3 areas where it can be seen from external locations, 2 from the road and another partial view from a nearby public bridleway to the north. From the south aspect shown on screen now, we also noticed the brick gables of the neighbouring barns, partly visible among the mature trees. This turned out to be one of the key moments of inspiration, helping us to understand the defining characteristics. The concept for Barrow House came out of a study of farming structures in the vicinity. Our local research had shown that agricultural buildings near the site and across the walls have a strong brick and pitched roof vernacular. Use of timber cladding and metal sheeting can also be seen on the farm buildings in particular. These utilitarian buildings are abundant and characteristic of the Lincolnshire Wolds farmyard, often located on concrete pads, normally over large areas, providing space for the movement of machinery and storage of agricultural equipment. Out of this investigation, we schemed a low-rise pitched roof barn form. This had a north-south orientation, emulating the arrangement of the nearby barns. It sit in a concrete plinth, suggesting of a yard, and would be cut into the sloping site to enable semi-subterranean accommodation below. Above this, a cantilevered extruded pod was introduced as a counterpoint to the barn, with its axis focused on the Barrow. Our viewpoint studies and context model showed the built form would be mostly hidden from the public highway, with the barn element deliberately intended to be the only aspect that was appreciably visible from outside the site. Materially, the concept was driven by the use of concrete in the base plinth. and importantly, the innovative use of a concrete made from something called ground granulated blast furnace slag. Known as GGBS, this is a byproduct of the steel production process carried out at Scunthorpe, about 20 miles away. The GGBS replaces most of the Portland cement, reducing the embedded energy normally associated with concrete production. This lowers carbon emissions at source and uses a waste material which should otherwise be disposed of. The final product is a clean, light colour and is inherently stronger and more durable than Portland-based concrete. The barn form of the structure is intended to emulate the attractive brick and pan-tile barns prevalent in the area. We were keen to keep the material palette as simple as possible, so chose to finish this element in a Corten steel material, taken up and over the roof. This is a metal cladding which starts as a dark coloured steel, changing to a rich terracotta colour as it oxidises. This has the benefit of a brick and pan tile appearance from distance and a metal clad agricultural building from nearby. It was supplied locally in Grimsby and was another sustainable advantage connected to steelwork production in Scunthorpe. The image on here shows the weathered Corten over the almost white GGBS concrete. Simple but this crisp detailing further reinforces the simple forms, with the wildflower planted flat roof continuing and connecting with the surrounding meadow. The site biodiversity and landscape design was an integral consideration from the start. The wider area of the Lincolnshire Wolds is a mix of woodland, rolling hills, chalk streams and farmland. It has a wide character mix, but vast areas of the Wolds are now intensive arable fields following widespread deforestation and clearance of meadows. Our intention was to continue the return of the site already started by the client's family, from intensive arable farmland to its original pastoral grassland. We consulted with numerous ecology and wildlife specialists to develop a sympathetic landscape proposal, an ongoing management plan for the site, including wildflower meadows, extensive tree and hedgerow planting, native orchard planting and enhancements to the existing pond. This has inherently improved the site both chemically and ecologically, allowing the soil to recover from fertiliser and pesticides used for years on the farmland. Habitat features were incorporated across the site to encourage insects, amphibians, bats and birds. Only a relatively small area of amenity grass was retained near the house as a domestic area and as a location for the ground source heat pump coil. The extensive scheme of landscaping, local orchard planting, wildflower meadows and new tree planting shown on the site plan all help to reinstate the type of rolling meadow that would have once been abundant in the Wolds. The most appealing views out of the site are down the hillside into the valley, along with the key viewpoint of the Barrow, both to the west. Obviously, we had to locate all of the habitable accommodation on this side with expansive glazing, keeping the public facing east side understated with limited fenestration. This links to a predominantly passive environmental design strategy to achieve the most efficient thermal and environmental performance for the house. The solar strategy results in the smallest elevation facing south, reducing overheating and glare, with almost all glazing located to the west side with inbuilt solar shading. This results in less intense morning and midday sun, but harnesses solar gains to the thermal mass concrete elements from midday onwards. Spatially, the client's requirements were for the day-to-day zonal functioning of a house to suit their future family plans, as well as their social life. Equal-sized bedrooms, no hierarchy were required for future children, while a guest suite and ample social space within the living areas were essential. The plan layout places all of the day accommodation at the lower level, with a concrete-based structure within the concrete-based structure, which allows extensive direct connection to the landscape private spaces. Entrance is taken into the middle of the north side by an understated parking courtyard cut into the slope. From here, the garage, utility and plant spaces can be accessed, along with a study and a generous cloakroom. A short flight of steps leads down to the main living area space and an uninterrupted view of the valley via an 18-metre full height glazing elevation. Going upstairs from the entrance hall has the interest of long sight lines along the barn corridor, with a full height window at each end, framing contrasting views of open landscape to the south and woodland to the north. 3 double bedrooms, a guest suite and a family bathroom are housed in the barn form, while the main bedroom suite is located in a projecting pod, enjoying expansive views focused on the Barrow. The clients for Barrow House had originally come to us with a specific idea of the type of house they wanted, but when we explained the nature of the planning requirements, they're fully engaged with the process with open minds and were keen to explore the possibilities for the site. They listened to our suggestions and took time to understand the implications, and they trusted our expertise. Their adaptive approach was a key factor in the success of this project. It was great to celebrate with them when the application was unanimously approved at Planning Committee and during the time since, as it has gone on to receive such amazing plaudits. Now I'm going to hand over to Rob to run through a virtual tour of the project during construction and completion.
Thank you, Andy. Hi there, everyone. Right, so yes, I'm going to start at the start of construction. So they broke ground in February 2017, which involved clearing the site, removing the concrete hard standing pad, and commenced what was quite a large civil engineering undertaking of a lot of cutting away from the hillside, all of which was kept on site and was moved around to create a flatter plateau for the sort of garden areas and to create some sort of bunding to the left hand side of the site as it went down the hill. Obviously the location of the site on the hillside, with the chalky ground and with a sort of an underground spring running directly underneath the site, piling and a raft was required. So there were 99 concrete driven piles to hold the building in place. Obviously, as I said, all of that cut that's come from all the hillside there was kept on site, which was important. All of the concrete below ground is also GGBS concrete with a waterproofing mixture, and also then with external waterproofing membranes to make sure there were no issues with water ingress later on. Just got some details here on the left of the main cut through from the barn, and then going through to the concrete parapets at ground floor. And then the photos on the right here show the in situ poured concrete walls that were retaining structures. So there's a bit of steel in there to keep all of that ground back behind that retaining wall that sort of wrapped around the back of the building at lower ground floor level. Alongside the concrete and the retaining structures was a bit of steel, mainly for the pod, and the 18 metre long beam that also goes over the courtyard space to the south there. And then the bottom right there, that was when the roof was starting to go on. Despite its innovation in a lot of ways, obviously, as we know, costs and things, the construction and sort of method of construction for the barn was very traditional with rafters and masonry behind the cladding. This was a photo about a year and a half on from starting. So the main structure had gone up and the weathering steel had been put on. So July 2018, and that's how it started. And again, cost saving, we didn't go pre-weathered steel, but actually it only took about 3 months for it to start getting some colour and some weathering to it. At this stage as well before completion, the clients started planting some of the landscape, the hedgerows, the meadows were starting to go in at this stage to help accelerate that for when the project came to completion. A few photos from inside. So that photo on the left is the master bedroom pod with the fixed glazing that reaches out to the Barrow and takes in those wonderful views of the Lincolnshire wolds in that valley. And to the right there, that's the in situ concrete island that was again in the GGBS concrete. That's the real feature of that open plan space downstairs, all orientated facing the Barrow and the landscape beyond. So this was August 2018, so you can already see the Corten, the weathering steel starting to oxidise and rust already. We found that it was obviously starting off very dark. You'll see it goes very light, and then we're seeing now that it's starting to get a bit darker again as time goes on. Obviously, there's quite a lot of detail in the cladding with the cold roof space and other ventilation requirements. There was quite a lot of intricate sort of perforations that you don't necessarily see from this angle, but quite a lot of perforation in the Corten. So here's a little video that was done. I think at this point the clients had actually moved in.
Yeah.
They were living with the parents next door, and they were just ready to get in. So here's a little video with some cheesy, jazzy music. Brilliant. So yeah, that was taken sort of at the end, nearing the end of the construction phase. Obviously, things like the trestle cladding on the pod was still to be completed, and a lot of the landscaping was still to be finished. Obviously, since then we've got some more photos. We really want to get another bit of drone footage done, because it almost shows it off in its best light, really, and locks it into its landscape. So obviously, as Andy's mentioned, the landscape was such an important aspect of the project, and as time goes on, it will mature and really grow into its setting, as well as weathering further with the Corten. So I'm going to start sort of at the front, that main first public view from the main vehicle entrance, which was always important to try and keep it fairly understated. The barn, in its sort of agricultural language, and the concrete plinth, a fairly understated entrance, and as we said before, the landscape really wrapping around the whole building, really, and softening everything. Again, the fenestration, I think, as Andy mentioned, sort of on that barn, very simple, and yeah, only a few windows to really lock in the key views and axes inside to get those key views. As we sort of come around the back of the building on the east side, the main sort of Corten barn element, very simple in its form, with its hidden gutters, very undomestic in its appearance, really. Again, sort of making it look like a brick and pantile barn. Sort of as we come around the corner a little bit, this is a closer in view of the second public viewpoint, which still really we wanted it to sort of sit in its landscape, sit in this meadow. There's moments of concrete below, but again, it was mainly about these gable forms sat alongside the historic sort of converted barns behind the tree line to the north. Again, it shows the landscape beyond and the meadows and how important that all is. as we come around, moving sort of southwest, the building sort of starts to reveal itself somewhat, even though again it's not really seen from public views here. So we've got the only real sort of vertical element is the concrete chimney that sort of breaks up all of the linear beams and concrete going across the building, quite low and long. But then this concrete chimney sits vertically there, and a nice bit of corner glazing that again has that relationship with the patio space in the courtyard, just there. Again, round the west elevation is far more generous and domestic in terms of very generous amounts of glazing, taking in those westerly views, and the barn sort of reveals itself as this two-storey element that's sort of slotted into the landscape, which you don't really pick up from the roadside, from the highway. We know other clients that have sort of cycled past or driven past. When they see the photos from this side, obviously it sort of reveals itself as quite a dramatic piece of architecture, rather than from the public view being quite sort of modest in its scale. Internally, it's very clean, very simple. We've used the concrete for the island in the kitchen as a real monolithic sort of centre point for that living space. We didn't specify the wine corks in the chimney breast in the concrete. That was a client thing. Again, upstairs on the left hand side, that's the view back over the entrance door. So we've got that glazed link all the way end to end, where the corridor runs, with a bit of with views to the trees to the north and over the fields to the south. And again, on the right hand side, the concrete effect tiles at ground level, creating that lovely inside-out space. Again, this 18-metre length of glazing, as Andy mentioned, just relates all of the living space downstairs. It's all about the views, taking the Barrow and the valley. And they had a bit of time, obviously, before COVID hit, but the family and their friends have all commented on how great that space is, with the informal end with the kitchen and a living space behind the camera here, and then a more formal area with a log burner at the far end around the chimney breast. So that is where we are, and we can pass over to Ross for any questions that may have come up for that whistle stop tour and the spotlight. If you're there, Ross.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, thank you very much. That's fascinating. We had a few questions posted, but I think I'll start with one myself, actually, on the kind of side of the planning side of it. How much weighting, or what factors do you think were more persuasive to the planners in terms of getting a good result? I mean, there's obviously a lot of effort being put onto the biodiversity and the landscape side of it, and obviously the look of the house itself as well, and then all the things you mentioned about the barn look and the aesthetic and the concrete. Would you give a weighting to one of those items over another, or?
Well, I think paragraph 79 does tend to be weighted in its decision making process. I think it's actually a really good question. The building itself, it's about how it sits in its landscape. It's about having the barn form and its relationship to the barns to the north, obviously. Because there are only sort of really two public viewpoints where you can really appreciate the building in any way. Those are the two key aspects, and getting those right was probably the key thing. We did work with the planner quite a lot over materials, didn't we? We discussed that. We put about 3 or 4 different material options to them, and you know, it was, as some of them were considered to be not locally appropriate. At one point we had shingles and things, didn't we? We were testing a few options, and we eventually kind of came across we always knew the GGBS concrete was going to be as almost a starting point. But once we came across the idea for the Corten steel, it kind of fell into place from there, didn't it? And I think that was something that the local authority and the planning case officer really bought into, this idea of a building that almost emulates a brick and pan tile barn from a distance, but closer in, it's more of an agricultural kind of shed. And I think that actually is quite successful in that sense. When you see it on site, you do get that impression. So yeah, that, and obviously how it sits with its landscape, and also the relationship to the local scheduled monument, the Barrow, as well. That was critical because it's such an important landscape element, and really it's kind of unappreciated, isn't it? Or it was previously. There's that, you can only really see it from, you know, very few areas in public terms. And, you know, obviously the manor house actually relates to it, that faces onto it, but other than the manor house, nothing really has any appreciation of the Barrow. So the fact that we were incorporating that into this design, and it was such a critical aspect, I think that was viewed as being quite a strong, a strong point, really.
Okay, yeah.
Anything else? No.
Sorry. It's got a question from Paul, who said the floor plan looks really nicely resolved. Were there any more iterations to get this far, or did it resolve itself quite quickly?
Oh, thank you, Paul. Yeah, I mean, it was as designs go for these kind of, you know, quite large houses. We actually hit on this one fairly quickly, didn't we? We originally we proposed an original design which was a little bit smaller than this one to the clients, but they felt they needed some more additional kind of more formal living space, didn't they? Because you know, they wanted to be able to have to entertain and, you know, have more options for where they lived. So yeah, the floor plan grew a little bit from the first iteration, but, you know, it was quite a simple process, wasn't it? Yeah. The clients, as we mentioned in the presentation, the clients were really open, and they originally came to us wanting a barn conversion type building, didn't they? So that, again, that was a bit of an inspiration behind us going down the agricultural route, wasn't it? But it was appropriate. You know, the way they were very adaptable to our suggestions, and they took time and understood what we were aiming to achieve. Yeah. That really enabled us to get there very quickly, didn't it? I think.
Yeah. That sort of that ground floor element as well, sort of cut into the hillside, and then an element on top lent itself very well to living accommodation and bedroom accommodation, and then it nicely then sat with all the ancillary space behind, tucked away under the flat roof, and it sort of. Yeah,
I think you're right. I don't think we've really made enough of the fact that it does cut into the slope. It sits in, because it's quite a steeply sloping site. I think 7 meters from top to bottom, isn't it? Yeah. So that was one of the very first things that was obvious, wasn't it? That it would have to be something that sits into the slope, and obviously the way the slope works as well, with its high point on the east on the roadside, that was an obvious kind of tool to help us disguise the building as well and allow it to open up to the views. So yeah, hope that answers your question.
On the use of the slope then, was it ever an idea to do an upside down house to get more of the views from being up high and have a living accommodation at first floor?
Yeah, I mean, potentially it's something we did discuss. We've never really tried it, to be honest, because I think the clients were always very keen to make sure they had very good access to the landscape. I think that was the driving factor, wasn't it? They really wanted to. I mean, upside down living is great, and we could have incorporated it into this with planted roofs and things that we've incorporated, but we felt it needed for those roofs to be meadow planted to be able to help it to blend into the landscape. And yeah,
and also sort of fenestration on that barn, even though this side is the private side where public views, there's only sort of one, but to open this side of the barn up a lot more, it would sort of wouldn't be quite right with the language of that barn, whereas below it works quite well, breaking that concrete up with large expanses of glass, and be able to fully make most of that inside outside space.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the resolved floor plan of it working as it is now seems to suit the site better than the other way around. Like you say, I think you want to be able to walk out your big doors out of your kitchen onto your pasture land, really. Yeah,
and also I think if you had kind of a terrace above that ground floor level, that would be potentially more visible in the landscape as well, and a bit more domestic looking. So it probably would have been more of a planning challenge, I think, wouldn't it? I couldn't, to be honest, I'd be surprised if the local authority would have supported us on that anyway.
Yeah. Going back to planning then, and I said this was your first paragraph 55. It was then submission. I know you've done a few more since then. So David asks, as part of this application, did you go to a design review panel before submitting for planning?
At the time, design review panel wasn't a widely tested thing, really, was it? It wasn't something that we were required to do for this one.
Not in this borough, no.
No, it has been on pretty much every one we've done since. And to be honest, design review panel we found to be quite a positive process. We had to learn how to deal with the design review panel. I think the first one we made a mistake where we almost did too much, and we took an almost polished proposal. Where I think design review panel, if you can engage with them from a very early stage, even almost a pre-planning stage. I mean, is at the time that you do stage one, really. Then we see it as quite a powerful tool to us, and something where we can engage with our peers and really get some good feedback, and it's never really led to any detriment of any proposals, so we're concerned.
And and in terms of design and planning officers taking sort of subjective view on a design of what is exceptional in policy, they need that now. I think they've got to a point where more and more need that sounding board from the design review panel to say yes, it has met that bar that is required, and this is why, rather than a planner just saying yes, we like it.
I think you're right, and I think quite a lot of paragraph 79 type houses come forward now, much more than a few years ago. So I think in some ways it probably releases a degree of pressure from the planning authority to be able to place their faith in the architectural community, I suppose.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It becomes very subjective to whoever the plan officer is, but yeah, if they have some guidance, it helps a lot, doesn't it? So from planning and the overall scheme to very micro, Rick asks, was the mop stick handrail to satisfy building regs?
Was the what, sorry?
The mop stick handrail.
Handrail?
On the stair?
I think it must be, yeah.
Yeah, again, that was client choice. Yeah,
I mean, you have to have a handrail on the stairs. There's no two ways about it. You have to have it on one side of the stairs, and that's kind of what we needed. Yeah,
I mean, interestingly, with the flat roof, particularly around the back on the east side of the building next to the highway, obviously the parapet of the flat roof sits above the planted meadow, and because the window on the back of the corridor at first floor is openable for maintenance, there was a bit of discussion with building control about, well, actually they were kind of pushing for this flat roof should have a guarding, and we're saying, well, no, it's not accessible. Accessible. It won't be accessible, and we met in the middle regarding the height of the meadow and the ground level.
Yeah,
to
we
the
set,
back of
I
the
think
property,
we,
didn't we?
yeah, we set it at the minimum we could get away with without it needing. So effectively, it would create a barrier to the roof to avoid the roof needing a guarding, an edge protection. Yeah.
So materiality wise, obviously using the slag from Scunthorpe from the steel manufacturing process, I think that's brilliant. And obviously then the steel itself as well. There's a question saying how long does the steel take to rust properly, you know, from start to finish? But I love the fact that putting the raw steel on first and then watching it progress and go through the process adds more of a story to the building as well. How much of a difference does that make in terms of the cost of the building, but also then does it lose any efficiency in the product or not?
Well, no. So I mean, the product itself is weathering steel, and it was mainly cost saving to not pay for the pre-weathered Corten. So we made sure with the engineers, I think, to make sure with fastening back and the battening and everything that there was sufficient fixings, and I think the level of rust shouldn't be to a point where it will sort of allow anything to fail.
The thick sheets.
Oh,
were they about 4 or 5 mil?
Yeah, they were substantial.
Yeah,
substantial
very heavy. And but if this is a sample, no, it's not quite 4 or 5. It's about 3 mil, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, they're intended for this purpose. And you know, the unweathered version of Corten steel is the same product as the post weathered. So it made no difference to the structure or the longevity of the build. But
in terms of the weathering as well, sort of it started off as that dark sort of blue steel effect. It very quickly, particularly on the roof, that's more exposed, went to that orange. The gables and the walls followed. Probably in the sort of completed photos, that was probably at its orangest.
Yeah.
And now we'd expect it. I think it's 10 to 15 years. It'll keep going browner and browner.
Yeah.
Which I think again will develop with the landscape and soften it even further.
Yeah. It went from the sort of dark brown steel to sort of orange colour fairly quickly, didn't it? It was 3 or 4 months, yeah, something like that. And I think, as Rob just said, that it started with the roof because that was the part that was obviously more exposed to sunlight and rain, and the sort of vertical elements took a little bit longer, didn't they? But so it looked a bit odd for a short amount of time, but it soon caught up, didn't it? And yeah, it was a nice surprise every time we went out to site, wasn't it? To see the change in it.
Yeah, and especially for the client as well. I suppose going back every day, it changes from month to month as well, and for its length of time. Yeah. So we'll just have a couple more questions, if that's all right. One of them focusing more on the heating and cooling of the building and the environmental side of the building. So one was, how is the building heated and cooled? But then also factoring in the RIBA Climate Challenge 2030 and how the building responds to that. Well,
the building is heated and cooled. Obviously, we've mentioned the solar glazing, the solar design, thermal kind of design. That basically we positioned all the windows on the west side with solar shading. The whole of the lower level of the building is obviously constructed from concrete, which has very high thermal mass, so that warms up during the day as the sun's on it, and then gives off heat in the evening. The building itself, because of the way it's configured with corridors and a fairly open layout and stairs, the connection through the building allows a degree of sort of passive stack ventilation, doesn't it, which helps to keep it cool in summer by opening windows at different ends of the building. It's actually heated. The space heating is underfloor heating powered by a ground source heat pump. The ground source heat pump coil we positioned in the lawn area, basically the amenity grass area, because we were aware that obviously during certain times of the year the ground source coil can take heat out of the ground, and because we were planting a meadow which we thought might be potentially quite sensitive, we were advised it could be potentially quite sensitive to those sort of heat differences. We yeah, like I said, we positioned it in underneath the lawn area.
Yeah, and then in terms of, I think a quick look at this, just checked it before. So obviously with the ground source heat pump, essentially, as I'm sure many people know, it sort of works at essentially 400% efficiency because of the warmth that it's pulling out of the ground, and obviously it's run electrically, but converting that into heat, you're using 25% of what it would take to heat this building in using a gas boiler. So that 400% thing. In terms of heating and hot water load, off the top of my head, I think it's 22 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year. I think in terms of the 2030 targets, that's 35, so sort of 2/3 of that. So it's a very well insulated, and that heating system sort of just keeps the heating load and requirement right down. I think the clients have been in there a few years now, a few winters, and I think they said they've had the log burner on at the far end of the open plan space once or twice. On both occasions they had to open the window because it was a bit too warm.
I wish I had that same problem in my house. So just to finish, I think I picked it up earlier on. Someone asked a question which is quite interesting to mention. I think now that it is built and it's obviously got the awards and accolades it deserves, is there anything you change about the project?
You see, I was kind of aware this question might come up, and I was thinking this the other day, and it's difficult to say. I think there are maybe some aspects that possibly could do with just slightly warming up. Maybe maybe the use of a different floor finish, or But then we needed or we wanted to achieve thermal mass in the floor. We're pretty happy with it. I think like I said, we got to this solution quite quickly. The key thing for us was that the clients were absolutely delighted with it. They've not come back to us with any downsides whatsoever, have they? I think it's been a resounding success as far as it being a habitable family home. On a design side of things, there were a couple of changes that got made during design, partly due to cost engineering, which given the choice and an unlimited budget, we would have probably preferred to have kept a few things in, but nothing really that has in any way. No. These are only things that we would notice because we know. Yeah. But yeah, sorry, that's a really vague answer. But
but yeah, I mean, I think the key elements are. I don't think you could do an awful lot differently from a planning point of view. And I mean that there was a lot of time spent obviously on the technical package to make sure everything worked, and the planted roof and the concrete, making sure that sort of with thermal bridging and everything that worked. Internal layout, I think it responded really well to the client brief and the spaces that they required. So I think
just small things. I think, like you said, I think a few small detail things that we know about, but I'm not going to mention any of them now. I don't think that would be fair to anybody. And
the short answer is no. Yes, that's brilliant, guys. That's been fascinating. It's obviously a fantastic scheme, and I'm sure everyone will agree. A really engaging presentation from start to finish. So thank you to you two, Tony, Rob, and the rest of the team at ID Architecture, I'm sure are watching in the background. Also, I'd like to say a big thanks to Claire, Faye, Christine, and all the team at RIBA Yorkshire, who spend many hours helping us put these presentations together, and are a godsend to our little branches. So thank you to you guys, and a thank you to our members for turning up, and to other people who are interested who turn up as well. Just a reminder that if you want to watch it again, if you feel that way inclined, it will be uploaded onto the RBA YouTube channel. So feel free to watch it again there. So until then, have a pleasant rest of your evening, and join us again soon. Thank you very much.